What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. They say every purge in Russia has a well-choreographed script, but this time it looks like that the director threw away the old notes and decided to completely improvise. For years, the ex-defense minister Sergei Shoigu seemed untouchable. The Kremlin's decorated frontman, the man who traveled with Putin to remote taiga forests to hunt, and who was praised for boosting the armed forces' prestige. But in 2024, everything changed. Shoigu's entire inner circle was targeted, dismantled, and practically erased from the political map. If you're wondering what triggered this kind of large-scale retaliation, or how in the world these arrests reached into the corners of the government no one ever pays attention to, well guys, you are not alone. The truth is that power in Russia is no longer about loyalty alone. It is about delivering measurable results to the top. And it does not even matter if whatever you say is real or not. As long as it is good news. That's all that matters. And if you fail in such seemingly easy job, well, just lie and say something good. The system devours you and the people who dare to stand close to you as well. It's one thing to read about a single high-profile arrest. Russia's had plenty of those. But watching wave after wave of detentions, all tied to the very same group of officials, it starts to look like a performance of an unstoppable force. With each fresh arrest, be it of a deputy defense minister or a contractor with murky ties to high-level corruption, an entire network of shady dealings unravels. The regime that once prided itself on a stable pyramid of political clans suddenly finds itself in the middle of internal warfare, driven by factions determined to claim what used to be Shoigu's domain. People are now worried not just about who has gone behind the bars, but who is quietly realigning themselves to avoid the guillotine. From the outside, this might seem like the Kremlin decided to clean the house after the fiasco of 2022 mercenary rebellion. Perhaps Putin, humiliated by Yevgeny Prigozhin's short-lived uprising, demanded accountability. But beneath this superficial storyline, you discover something more complicated. This purge was designed to address financial hemorrhaging in Russia's defense ministry, yes, but it also reshaped the entire flow of rent money, realigned allegiances, and introduced a new wave of uncertainty among the elites. Now, they all know one thing. If they cross the invisible line or just find themselves standing on the wrong side of the alliances, their fortunes, careers, and at some point even lives could vanish in the heartbeat. That is the power of rotation through repression, a tactic as old as Russian politics itself, but rarely carried out on such a massive scale. Instead of transferring officials to different positions quietly, they are being dragged out in handcuffs and shot into detention centers in public. The upheaval is so extensive that the consequences can be felt in agencies dealing with everything, from military forestry to social payments to troops. Some may be relieved to see the downfall of Shoigu's clan, but the real question is whether this method of purging and rearranging might spread to every corner of the government, and if it does, who is going to be next? So today, let's talk about the purge. At first it was just a rumor. Sergei Shoigu, the man who had cultivated a certain mythic image, at least in Russia, a tough guy in uniform, a loyal friend of the president, was apparently on very thin ice. People whispered that the bloated budgets of the defense ministry, which skyrocketed after Russia's long standoff with Western powers, had become a gold mine for corruption. Maybe you heard it too in the hushed corners of political circles. Shoigu's men were not just stealing funds, they were building entire personal empires with money intended for national defense. Then one day a single spark ignited the rumor. Ex-deputy defense minister Timur Ivanov was arrested. Right there in front of everyone, wearing his medals like they could shield him from handcuffs, but, well, they didn't. Timur Ivanov had been Shoigu's loyal associate for years. If he wanted to do business with the defense ministry, he was the man who could open the right doors for you. For a price. But once he was in custody, investigators discovered a labyrinth of questionable deals, hidden bank accounts, and documents no one was supposed to see. In normal times, an official of his rank might buy his way into house arrest or secure some behind-the-scenes protection. After all, he was on the Western sanctions lists, had apparently served in the armed forces, and could flash medals proving his loyalty. But none of that mattered. The moment he was placed in a cell, it was clear this was not your usual soft landing, where a disgraced official resigns quietly and then disappears in Siberia. This was a new game, and the people orchestrating it showed no mercy. This is what started it all, the purge that continues all the way until today. It is important to note that Defense Ministry has always been a magnet for bribes and under-the-table deals. Whether it is a construction contracts to build military facilities or digitizing the vast bureaucracy, well, obviously every corner can be exploited for profit. And if you think a single man could siphon off billions of rubles on his own, you underestimate just how many cogs in the machine need to be involved. Once the investigators pulled at the thread of Ivanov's dealings, it was only a matter of time before the tapestry started to unravel. Suddenly, arrests multiplied like a contagion. First a couple more officials, then entire departments, then business associates who served as middlemen. Everyone fell to the regime. If that was where the purge ended, we'd be talking about a localized scandal. But the moment the investigators realized how widespread the corruption was, they launched a campaign that reached every Shoigu crony in sight. From huge corporations to lesser-known agencies dealing with timber on military bases, anyone with even the smallest link to Shoigu's old network found themselves under huge scrutiny. The caretaker of war-themed park, under arrest. A bureaucrat funneling money to suspicious contractors, detained. The outflow of money that once greased the system suddenly became an exposed nerve, and the state sank its teeth in with no mercy. As wave followed wave, the purge took on a life of its own. It might be tempting to imagine some mastermind in the Kremlin orchestrating every arrest, but in reality this process often involves multiple competing security agencies seizing their chance to settle old scores. The Federal Security Service, the FSB, the ex-KGB, and the Investigative Committee have rarely had a harmonious relationship with the military, and with the purge in full swing, they saw an opening to exploit. Dig up on old files from 2019? Yeah, sure, why not? Revisit the suspicious transfer of funds from a remote base in Siberia? Let's do it, absolutely. The appetite to cleanse the Defense Ministry was matched only by the appetite for revenge among agencies that felt sidelined by Shoigu's circle. When the next wave of arrests pulled in another deputy defense minister, Dmitry Bulgakov, along with a bunch of his business partners, you could practically hear the panic rippling through Russia's corridors of power. If men this high-ranking were suddenly subject to indefinite detention, what about all those smaller fish who fattened up their wallets but never made headlines? If you had a contract with the Defense Ministry, you needed to start destroying the evidence or begging your superiors for protection. Assuming your bosses were not themselves already behind the bars by then. There is a moment in every purge when people realize no one is safe, and that moment arrived as soon as news broke that investigators planned to seize the personal assets of Ivanov and Popov, another former defense minister close to Shoigu. In all that chaos, one figure remained conspicuously quiet: Shoigu himself. He was moved to another post, apparently under Putin's personal protection, yet that protection proved worthless when it came to shielding his circle. Investigators zeroed in on Shoigu's men with the single-minded determination of bounty hunters, capturing them one by one. Maybe the Kremlin wanted to send a message: no single clan is bigger than the state. Or maybe they wanted to satisfy the bloodlust of public still reeling from economic troubles or expenses and the memory of that rebellion led by Prigozhin. If Shoigu had avoided condemnation for mishandling the crisis that allowed a mercenary group to march literally within hundreds of miles of the capital of Russia, Moscow, then at least his subordinates would pay the price. The logic, twisted though it is, makes a kind of sense in a place where scapegoats are always needed to explain away failures. But there is a more tangible reason for the purge too. Money. Russia's defense budget exploded in recent years, and these money flows are too massive, too juicy to be left in the hands of one faction, especially after that faction proved incompetent at maintaining stability. If you are Putin, it's a win-win scenario. Punish Shoigu's circle for letting rebellion happen on their watch, and then redistribute the ministry's newly freed up cash streams among more loyal or at least less threatening groups. No one in the upper echelons dares to object because they have seen what happens to people who already do. If you have been following Russian politics for even a little while, you know that big money is usually concentrated in single blocks, neat and tidy, allocated to specific elites and their cronies. One group might get control of oil exports, another of metal factories, and so on. This ensures no inter-elite conflicts spin out of control. You feed off your assigned sector, I feed off mine. For years, the defense ministry belonged to Shoigu's clan. They had their slice of the pie, and as long as they stayed in their lane, the system ran smoothly enough, relatively speaking. As you can guess, not anymore. After the purge, the ministry was fractured into pieces, each chunk falling under the influence of a different faction. The new defense minister, Andrei Belousov, might look like the primary beneficiary, but even he cannot consolidate the entire structure. He's only been allowed to place a single close associate, Oleg Savelyev, in a major role, overseeing the digitization. And meanwhile, construction, another cash cow, has been handed off to Pavel Fratkov, whose father once led the Foreign Intelligence Service. And then there is Anna Tsevilova, President Putin's niece, now in charge of military medicine and social payments.
As the chairperson of the Kremlin-backed Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation. She previously served as a member of the Council on Issues of Trusteeship in the Social Sphere under the Russian government in 2019. Pavel Fratkov, son of Mikhail Fratkov, the former Prime Minister and longest-serving Director of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, has held several significant roles. Since 2021, he has been the first Deputy Administrator of the Presidential Administration.
Nepotism? No. It's a patchwork approach, similar of dividing feudal lands among vassals in the medieval times. On paper, this division looks like a classic attempt to put elite factions against one another so they do not get too comfortable. If they are busy competing for contracts, they have less time to conspire. The logic from the Kremlin's point of view is that competition fosters efficiency. In practice, however, you are inviting them to fight tooth and nail for the biggest budgets and best connected contractors. Each group wants to carve out its own empire within the ministry, leading to endless confrontations, sabotage, and unscrupulous alliances. If the goal was to root out corruption, you have to wonder whether scattering the defense ministry's assets among multiple factions is the best approach, or if it is just multiplies the possibilities for even more corruption. The broader elite is watching, worried they might be next. If Shoigu's clan, which once enjoyed almost limitless resources and had the personal favor of the president, can be dismantled, what's to say the same fate will not befall on any other powerful group? Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Trutnev, the long-standing overseer of Russia's Far East, has been building his own network of loyalists for years. Ramzan Kadyrov, the iron-fisted ruler of Chechnya, has practically turned his region into an impenetrable personal fortress. If one of them falters, what's to stop the Kremlin from orchestrating a purge that seizes their dominion and redistributes it to rivals? You might think Putin would want to stop this before it devours the state from within. After all, too much elite infighting can lead to fractures in a regime that prides itself on being a vertical of power. But the signals from the top suggest something else. Maybe this is the new normal. Maybe the Kremlin believes it can micromanage these purges and use them as a tool to maintain control, ensuring no single faction grows so influential that it threatens the very center. In a way, it is the ultimate expression of personalized rule. The Tsar dividing spoils among competing boyare, making them all dependent on the throne for survival. None of this changes the fact that a prolonged standoff with the West has created enormous stress on Russia's political system. The war machine demands money, the economy struggles under sanctions, and the population is growing weary of seeing resources siphoned into foreign adventures while domestic problems pile up. The defense budget is so gargantuan that the opportunities for theft balloon accordingly. For the Kremlin, that means constant vigilance, ensuring that any official who gets too rich or too bold might face an abrupt downfall. Of course, there is a paradox here. If you keep dismantling major elite groups like Shoigu's, you risk eroding the loyalty base that has always underpinned Putin's rule. But perhaps the Kremlin bets that new factions will rise, more loyal to the president for their newly assigned privileges, and that this cycle can continue indefinitely. If you think about it, the system thrives on fear. Fear of losing power. Fear of being indicted. Fear of seeing your assets seized. In that sense, the Purge is a spectacular example of the old saying, better be feared than loved. Nobody loves what's happening, but they sure do fear it, and that's enough to keep them in line. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thanks so much for watching. See you on Friday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.